Hi there. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Tinnitist TV. Today, I am talking to Debora Iyall, Romeo Void. She needed just 9 words to become a rock star. I might like you better if we slept together. That refrain from Romeo Void's edgy 1981 breakthrough single, Never Say Never, catapulted the young San Francisco band straight into the mainstream. Their meteoric career was admittedly short-lived. After making just 3 albums, Romeo Void broke up in 1985, and following one poorly received solo release in 1986, Iyall went back to school and eventually became an art teacher. But now she's taking a stroll down memory lane, thanks to the new Romeo Void album live from Mabuhay Gardens November 14th, 1980, which captures an early club show by the group. Shortly before the LP arrived for Record Store Day, Iyall zoomed in to talk about the old days, being recognized in the classroom, her Indigenous heritage, and much more. Enjoy. Well, Debora Iyall, thanks for taking the time to talk to me today. It is a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah. We are here to talk about your, I guess, self-explanatorily titled album coming out live from Mabuhay Gardens, November 14th, 1980. That says everything people probably need to know about it.
Yes, 1980. Can you imagine 43 years ago?
I know. So where did this recording come from? Is this something that you had or that somebody came to you with, or it just surfaced out of the blue somewhere?
Well, actually, the sound person from Terry Hammer is his name, from the Mabuhay Gardens, recorded all the bands that used to come through and play there, and all the local bands as well. And so he contacted me probably in the 90s to, share tapes with me. He said, I've got these tapes. Do you want to hear them? And I think I listened to them, but at that point I was like, well, great. It's just like archives,
Yeah.
But then later he started trying to find people to put them out, and he found Liberation Hall wanted to do it. And so when they asked me, well, would you agree to it? I said, sure. I'm interested myself, to see, what people's reaction would be to. It's really the earliest part of Romeo Void. We hadn't written A Girl in Trouble. We hadn't written Never Say Never. At the point that this show happens, it was before we recorded our first album.
Yes, yeah, very
we
early.
were a live act, And there is something that changes when you're a live act and you haven't really recorded yet, and so that freshness and that, for me, a sense of discovery, can happen in a show in a night. The band can sort of morph, by that experience. So I find it real interesting now to listen back. And it was not that long after Benjamin Bossi, the saxophone player, joined us. So I can hear him, finding his way in our songs. And we hadn't really written songs with him yet. Or maybe there's some on there that, we were starting to. So I kind of can't remember. But yeah. And I'm just thrilled, honestly, that anyone would be interested, that Liberation's Hall interested, that all these podcasters, because back in the day, we would go on college radio, or I would talk to print journalists. But pretty much most of the promotion for this has been talking to people like yourself who are, very enthusiastic about music and have these brilliant podcasts.
Well, I'm glad it's coming out too, and I'm also glad that it holds up for you, because it would be kind of a bummer if you listened to it and went, well, it's okay.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised, honestly, because you just don't know going that far back. I mean, I can hear when I'm making mistakes.
Your taste will change too. You don't know that maybe now, what you thought you might have liked it 10 years ago, but maybe now you would go, oh, I just hear all the mistakes, or I hear all the things I wish we had done,
Yeah, no, I don't feel that way at all. And I feel very grateful listening to the band, because the band, they were musicians. I was like a poet who just, I saw Patti Smith, and then I saw Penelope from the Avengers, And I thought, well, I have something to say. I can be in a band, you know, I can sing as good as that.
Well,
And,
yeah,
you know, I could.
that was
In my
punk rock.
opinion.
I mean, it also
Yeah,
seems like it seems like the Gardens was the right place for you guys to record. I get the sense that to some degree it was sort of like your home base.
absolutely. And I doubt if it was a weekend night, you know, because when we started out, it took quite a while before we headlined Mabuhay.
Mm.
We were one of, you know, the opening act that opened for bands had been playing longer, you know, and so like
Yeah. Well, it was a
Crime and
huh?
uh UXA and, you know, The Victims, you know, there were a lot of bands that, you know, we would open for the Mutants. Yeah, so
Did you realize how great the scene was? It was back in the day. I mean, when you were in the middle of it, were you conscious of, wow, all these great bands at this point in time in this city, this is really something special.
I didn't know what to compare it to
Yeah.
because I came from Fresno, which is a, you know, smaller town in the Central Valley of California. And, you know, they had some kind of groovy coffee shops that they had, you know, poetry events at, but not really a live music scene, nothing like San Francisco. So San Francisco, you know, I was super excited to be there. I had moved to San Francisco to go to the San Francisco Art Institute. And so when I got there and I went to one of my first painting classes, I walked by Penelope Houston's locker. She was the singer from the Avengers and lyricist, and she had left the year before. So she wasn't enrolled when I went there. And she had the lyrics to We're the One hand painted on her locker. And I walked by there and it was like, wow, you know, I'm really in the heart of things, you know. It's
And
pretty
did
awesome.
you paint the lyrics to any of your songs on your locker?
No. And in fact, I never did get a lock for my locker. It was kind of like they had some lockers. If you wanted to use them, you could. And I don't actually ever remember even keeping stuff in any locker.
Did you graduate?
Oh, yeah, I did.
Cool. Cool.
Yeah. And
You
then
know,
we went on tour.
there you go. I always felt like the band was a little bit ahead of its time in a lot of ways. I mean, people wanted to sort of pigeonhole you into that new wave or post-punk box, but your sound really was a lot more wide and complex than that in terms of the influences you guys were pulling from. Did you feel like people got you at the time?
We had a pretty enthusiastic fan base, but I think people in general were much more open to bands not sounding in any constricted, you know, way structurally or the kind of members they had. I know we wanted people to have more fun at gigs, you know, and me personally, I did, because I'd been to so many shows where everyone's just so cool, leaning against the wall, you know, watching the band all black, you know, and
Yeah.
it's a little bit dour, you know, and the energy was so much better than that, in my opinion. And so I sort of wanted to have some more fun and have it be danceable, maybe more melodic. But I also had no idea. I was not musically trained. I didn't know the difference between a verse, a bridge, and a chorus. In that respect, the band members were very gracious with me, you know, just letting me kind of walk in with journals of writings and poetry and us figuring out songs together. You know, they gave me a lot of leeway.
Did you guys start writing original stuff right from the
Oh,
get-go?
yeah,
Okay.
always. Yeah.
That's different because, you know, most bands start off playing covers, you know?
Yeah. And I had actually been in a cover band right before that. It was sort of along the lines of The Commitments. Remember that movie?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, where
Irish
we were
rock.
like playing Girl from New York City and 300 Pounds of Heavenly Joy. There was another lead singer, and then I was one of the two backup singers, and we had a few lead vocals. her and I,
Right.
but he sang the majority of the lead vocals, you know. But we did, you know, James Brown songs, Gene Pitney, you know, things like that. And we were like kind of wanting people to get that vibe from like the ska bands,
Yeah.
where it was more, you know, community oriented, dance oriented, you know.
It seems like you kind of brought some of that into Romeo Void, because I mean,
Yeah,
you've got the groove. There's a couple of the songs that have that sort of no wave via James Brown groove. And then of course the album has, which I just love, the encore song is the Swingin' Medallions, Double Shot of My Baby's Love, which the first single you, which is apparently the first single you bought.
yes, as a 45 at Rudy's Five and Dime.
Did you just have like great taste eternally?
Well, you know what's so funny is that many, many years later, I've been married to my second husband now almost 15 years, but I remember me telling him about Double Shot of My Baby's Love, because my band that I was sort of playing with in Sacramento when we lived there, so I always sort of try to have a band. I wanted to cover it, and they were kind of wondering, and I thought of them in my mind as kind of like these greasers, you know, like it was kind of lascivious, you know, it was such a thrill, it was hurting me, you know. That was like pretty provocative for me, you know, at like age 13 or whatever when I bought it. And he goes, no, that was yacht rock. And I'm like, really? Yeah. So when I saw a picture of them, I'm like, I never would have thought that's what they look like, because, you know, they're kind of all buttoned up and everything.
The Swingin' Medallions, come on.
Mhm.
The name says it all. Talking about Benjamin, I kind of have the sense that his saxophone to some degree was a little bit of your secret weapon, you know, because there weren't a lot of bands at that point that were using a saxophone in that scene and in that way.
Yeah. And he had a, excuse me, very particular ear, you know, and approach. You know, he really embraced the spontaneity, the improvisation. You know, Wayne Shorter, rest in peace, was somebody he adored. Miles Davis, you know, definitely jazz. He wasn't a Junior Walker sax aficionado, much more went in a different direction. And so we were kind of art school band, you know, because I mean, Frank and I were going to art school when we started the band, and Peter, the guitarist, him and I knew each other through the band I was in, the Mummers and the Poppers, the cover band, which was a side project of Charlie from the Mutants.
Wow.
Yeah, it was Charlie's side project to have this band. It was like, you know, kind of hilarious and stuff. And the other singer, Rachel, her and I used to buy the same material and make like matching tops and stuff. And, you know, we just embraced that. So, you know, I loved X-Ray Speck's use of the saxophone, you know.
Yeah,
That
well,
was
exactly.
exciting. Yeah. And Roxy Music. I was a fan of Roxy Music and David Bowie.
Sure. Well, yeah, who wasn't? Yeah.
Well, and that was kind of the only rock I really liked at that time.
Okay. What
There
else
was a
were you
lot more
listening to?
corporate rock and just, you know, it, yeah. So once I found like more bands like, okay, all of a sudden I'm blanking out. This is what happens when you get older.
That's
Something
okay.
you
I'm right there
absolutely
with you.
know is like unavailable. We're only making plans for Nigel.
XTC.
Yeah, life begins at the hop.
Yeah.
And then stop sobbing. You know, I had those 45s.
Yeah.
You know, so those were things. And Frank, the bass player, him and I and Peter were the main writers, and Peter's references were much more along like the Beatles and Stones and that kind of thing. And Frank actually, the Stones as well, as far as being just really solid, you know, rhythmically and locked, you know. So that was always important to us. And But Frank was listening to, a lot of Joy Division stuff. And I was a little more into Susie and the Banshees, And then Peter was listening to the Beatles or the Everly Brothers, and things like that. So I always felt like a band sound comes from the democracy of it. There are very skillful bands that it's one lead singer who propels all the songs and is the lead writer. And a lot of those bands are really good, but I think we were more like, let's be a group that, we take all the influences and then something interesting will happen.
Oh, and clearly it did. Yeah.
Because there's bands from that time where it's like, oh, you can really tell they liked the Police, where their songs were really structured on police type songs, and we didn't really want to do that. We wanted our songs to, sound different than everybody's.
Well, mission accomplished. Unfortunately, like a lot of bands, you ended before your time, largely due to music industry factors beyond your control. Was that, I'm guessing that must have been really frustrating at the time. How does it feel nowadays? Do you still kind of have a little bitterness towards it all, or has time sort of, smoothed out all the rough edges and you can just enjoy the fact that it happened and not that it ended?
A little bit the latter, I do think that just our culture moves on, even when we were in Romeo Void, the culture moved on to new romantic artists or Duran Duran, that was a sea change from Susie and the Banshees, sea change from Talking Heads. I listened to tons of Talking Heads. Talking Heads 77 was, like a revelatory record for me.
Sure.
Yeah. Judy's in the bedroom, inventing situations. Yeah. All that stuff was, just awesome. The way lyric content really opened up too, that songs didn't have to just be like love songs. I wasn't really buying the romantic myth of American pop songs at all.
No, for sure. But looking back at it all, do you have sort of a favorite memory of the Romeo Void days, of maybe a specific gig or something that just kind of was like the high point of it to you, or a couple of high points?
I do. There was this show we played on New Year's Eve in Seattle. And it was at this big, old theater, like maybe even 100 years old, with these great big windows. So it was kind of cold because it was snowing that night. And it started snowing, before we got there. And so it was like snowing the whole concert. And I'd never grown up in snow. I was from Fresno. Snow was something you went and visited for the day and then you came home, And so that was real exciting to me. And there were a lot of people there. It was kind of the height of our popularity. And we'd been touring enough that, we were tight. We knew how to make a show happen. And the energy was there. And that night just will always be special to me, because it was kind of like, once the lights hit us, we could just do no wrong. I just remember looking at Peter, the guitarist, looking at Frank, looking at Benjamin, turning around, looking at Larry, and just like, yeah, we're going to grab this night and take it as far as we can. And we were practiced enough and had enough songs that a set for us could be an hour and 15 minutes, no problem.
Yeah.
That's a long time to be putting out there. And then we'd throw in some fun, weird things, or things we were just writing, or, a cover song like, Apache or Double Shot of My Baby's Love for our encores, So we were always willing to come out for an encore with some song we hadn't used in the set that night, because usually sort of plan, if you got an encore, what are we going to do,
Cool. Are you up to anything musically these days?
Actually, I am. So recently, last March, I retired from teaching high school art.
Yeah.
I've been an art teacher in a public school in Desert Hot Springs. And my husband and I moved out to northern New Mexico. And he grew up near here in Colorado, around sort of south of Palmer, or south of Colorado Springs, so Palmer Lake area. And his friend who's helping us fix up our house is a carpenter and guitarist. And so he's been coming down. It's less now because we've been here a year. So we've done a lot of the things, you know, that we had to make the house really livable and good for us. And it had original hardwood floors and, you know, all the good stuff from being built in 1960. Great bones, good windows, nice light. I've got great windows here in my office studio. And so they would work on the house during the day. And at night, we just started learning songs. And I said, okay, why don't we just have a cover band here? And we can play, you know, community events, and, you know, whatever. And I didn't want the pressure of like, oh, I'm going to start a band and write all these new songs and try to put out a record. I just want to sing. And so every night we would sing and learn songs. And so now we've learned a lot of songs. I mean, right now we're getting ready to have our second front yard concert. And we have 13 songs in the first set and 13 songs in the second set. So we've learned a lot of songs. We're only doing 2 Romeo Void songs at this point, but we're probably going to add another one or 2 before, you know, we actually perform April 28th. But yeah, I really wanted to do that. And we're called the Raton 3.
Okay.
Because our town is Raton.
Gotcha. Are you doing the 2 obvious Romeo Void songs or other ones?
No, we're doing A Girl in Trouble,
Yeah.
but we're also doing I Mean It and Not Safe.
Oh, cool.
And we'll probably do Charred Remains. Now that Charred Remains has kind of come out because of the live record, it's like, oh yeah, we should learn Charred Remains. And I always kind of liked Fear to Fear too.
Yeah.
You know, fear, fear, hurt, hurt, you know, it's kind of upbeat rocker, you know, punky, you know.
Have you just sung Never Say Never enough times in your life that you don't need to do it anymore?
Kinda.
Yeah.
The record sounds better than me now, you know.
Sure.
I mean, I can still sing and all that, but I don't know. I aged out of it a little bit. You know, I've been happily married.
Yeah, well, exactly.
For
Yeah.
almost 15 years. And
yeah, the message is not quite topical anymore. Yeah.
But I love that people love it.
Yeah.
So we probably will learn a version of it. But I'm not leaning into it, you know. Our rocker at this point at the end of the set is Smithereens, Blood and Roses.
Perfect.
And REM's Don't Go Back to Rockville.
Nice. So,
you know, so go ahead.
Oh, no problem. I was just going to ask, when you were teaching high school art, how often did kids come in and go, I just listened to you. You didn't tell us who you were.
I know it would happen because sometimes parents recognize my name, and sometimes other teachers who thought it was a really big deal that I was at their school, they would tell the kids and show them videos. I had this one teacher friend who had kids in his room every day for lunch. And he'd always be showing them 80s videos. And he'd say, do you want to see something special? You know, and he'd put on, you know, Romeo Void, and they'd be like, and he'd go, yeah, that's Ms. Iyall. And so the kids would come in knowing that, or through their parents. And sometimes grandparents. I had grandparents come to back to school night and say, I was wondering if that was you. And I'd be like, yeah, it is.
I mean,
there is life after rock and roll.
Yeah, but on the one hand, it's really a compliment, but I guess sometimes too, it could be a little, oh, geez.
Yeah. Well, as long as there's no big expectation, you know.
Yeah, I hear you.
I'm going to suddenly, you know, spit out a song or something. You know?
Yeah.
Of course, the kids, I would play music all the time in my classroom. Music and art go together perfectly as far as I'm concerned during work times, you know, and I play, you know, both like lots of funk stuff and then things I liked, and then I would take requests, and then depending on how I felt about the kids' songs, because some of them they're wildly inappropriate. You know, that's how they are. And then other times they were really awesome, you know. I'd learn things. That's when I first listened to Nas X.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
the kids, it was a big popular song, and I was like, oh yeah, I like that song. You know, and Lizzo, you know, there's certain things that the kids like that, you know, now I like them.
Yeah. I'm guessing it was a thrill for you to get that Lifetime Achievement Award a few years ago from the Native American Music Awards. Well,
Absolutely. And they were so gracious about it. They'd been talking to me about it for a few years, but the people who, you know, ran the, you know, nominations or whatever, they were not buying it for a long time, you know. But I think, you know, as time changes and different people were involved and that sort of thing, then it became a thing of like, yeah, we need to do this. We need to give it to her. And, you know, I was kind of sad I couldn't go to it, but it was way out in northern New York, I think in February.
yeah.
And I mean, I would really just be going there to go on stage for like a minute and then of course meet everybody and all that. But it was like a huge trek, you know, take off a week from teaching practically, because I'm going to go all the way. I think it was like Rochester, New York or something. I'm going to do that. That's asking too much, honestly.
Yeah,
So I
but
didn't
still.
go. I recorded a video though in the video studio at the school. A couple of kids helped me and the teacher helped me write a, you know, gracious, you know, thank you and all that.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great. I mean, I think I read on your Wikipedia page that you were actually at Alcatraz for a week back when John Trudell and the AIM were there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I went, when I was in high school.
Yeah.
When I was 16, my mom let me take the Greyhound bus up there to be part of it. But that shows you who she was too. She was very progressive, very liberal. And her attitude was that I raised you, so I trust you. What she didn't realize is she shouldn't trust the world.
Sure.
You know, she gave me a lot of freedom that, you know, stuff happened that wasn't great, that I would get, you know, how come I'm in this situation? But anyway, Alcatraz wasn't that. It was a wonderful opportunity for me because I was basically a suburban kid. My mom, who raised us, is Caucasian, and my dad was Native American, and they got divorced when I was 2.5. So we moved to California. So I moved away from his family, you know, and that connection to the Indian community. And, you know, I just grew up in, you know, my mom was a veterinarian, so she was kind of professional, you know, so I was just kind of like a suburban kid, but I just didn't look like anybody else. You know, people would often think that we were adopted because my mom was light skinned, blue eyed, light brown hair. And then here are these 3 brown children that she has, you know, but it was all good, you know.
Yeah. Have you gotten more in touch with your heritage and
Absolutely.
as it's gone on? Yeah, as your life's gone on. Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, the first chance I could get, I moved away from Fresno. I went up to Eureka, California, and I worked at Indian Action Council preschool. So just my heritage and my tribal card and my last name. My last name is from my family. Iyall was our great grandfather's name. And then our family shortened it, anglicized it to be a family name, because that isn't how they used to do it, you know, where you had a surname. But we, you know, our family chose that. There's very few Native Americans who that happened to in a lot of tribes, and on the West Coast, in, you know, a lot of the tribes are Jones, you know, or Smith, that sort of thing. It was almost like a similar situation with slaves and their slave owners, you know. They got the name
Has it kind
out of colonialism.
Yeah, exactly. Has it impacted your music in any way, do you think?
My values, my outlook.
Yeah.
I became involved, you know, in being interested in the Indigenous way of seeing and being and knowledge and spirituality. My mom was agnostic, So that left the door wide open. And her preference, honestly, was not to have us all go sit in church. On Easter, she often would take us up to the mountains, or the foothills around Fresno, and we'd go have a picnic by a river, because, in her mind, God was in nature. So she shared that value. And my dad, I didn't see that much when we were growing up. We lived a couple states away, and he married a woman who was very strict Catholic. So we were the children of divorce, so we weren't really welcomed into the Iyall family that much because of her uncomfortableness about that until after she passed. And then so when I was in my 20s after she passed, then we got invited to the family reunions, and I got to meet all my cousins and my uncles and aunts, and a number of them have passed on since then. So I'm really glad that happened.
Yeah. Well, I mean, musically though, Indigenous music has really, come a long way and come into its own and is getting the attention it deserves these days.
Absolutely.
Do you pay attention to what's going on in that scene, or?
Not too much,
Yeah, okay.
What is, it's like with music, familiarity breeds content. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
And there was a book that someone wrote about, our emotional connection to music, and when it's formed in our adolescent years generally, and that sort of thing. So I'm a kid of like the British invasion, give me a them record, and I'm happy.
Yeah, well, there you go.
So,
fair enough.
but I can appreciate it. And of course, I really love what a lot of Native kids are doing now with hip hop and Native music, because that musically, it really opens the door for a lot of the rhythmic ideas that are in Indigenous music. And there are great, rock bands, along the years that have been doing music, Redbone, and then it was that jazz guy. I can't remember. I'm sorry, but he had this huge hit with a song that he wrote like in the 50s, and it has sort of a Native American chant to it.
Well, I mean, there's just been a huge, even Link Ray, way back in the day, right? It all goes back.
Robbie Robertson,
Yeah, well, exactly. And speaking of Canadians, have you ever heard
I loved his Red Boy record.
Yeah.
And his music that he did for the TV special or documentary, The Native Americans.
Yeah.
So, I went out and bought those things. Those are pretty mainstream.
Can I give you a recommendation?
Sure. I even have a Post-it note I can write it on.
For sure. This is a duo out of Calgary. They're called Misha. That's Miesha.
Okay.
And the Spanx. Spanx like baby bottom, not like the garment.
Oh, and the Spanx.
Yeah. It's just a female singer, guitarist, and a drummer. The music is kind of garage rocky, punky, but the content is all, it's really deep personal stuff. But she writes about, residential schools and the things that's been going on up here with finding all the deceased kids, buried outside the residential schools and all that, and her own family trauma, but it all still just rocks like a mother. So, the great band.
I will definitely check it out.
Yeah.
And honestly, when I went to get my teaching credential, then, there's little projects you do, for credit. And one of the things I worked on with a couple Native students, I was in a tribal educators program. Yeah. Where we were expected after we graduated to go teach in Indian communities for a while, and made a commitment to do that. And we made a presentation of the residential boarding schools and our grandmother and some of our aunts and uncles, that were older than my dad, went to residential schools. And so that's a huge story. And then I got involved in Native American art as well. In San Francisco, I worked at the American Indian Contemporary Arts Museum.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of like as soon as I grew up enough to travel to things on my own and discover, and like I always felt like an outsider, but also welcomed.
Yeah.
You can be both, because in a lot of Native communities, they know everybody who's in their tribe. But then when they meet people, you know, from other tribes, there's camaraderie and acceptance. You know, there's a lot of graciousness and curiosity. And so, you know, I learned pretty on, just be humble and listen more than you talk.
That's a good lesson, no matter where you are.
Yeah. And, you know, you'll be welcomed.
Yeah.
And that's how it definitely was on Alcatraz. Plus, when I got there, the first thing I did was I met a lot of the ladies who were doing all the work in the kitchen. So then I immediately had like a crew to hang out with, you know, because, hey, meals happen 3 times a day. You know, so if I got to know the ladies there, then I had a group to hang out with and just learn from observing.
Yeah, well, that's
And
the way.
always appreciated the sense of humor. Native people are hilarious.
Indeed. Well, what a fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, and Joey Clift, right?
Yeah.
The comedian.
Yeah.
So he got me involved in a little animation called Spirit Rangers.
Okay.
And it was something through Netflix, so you can get it through Amazon Prime, but also Netflix. And it's a animation series. So far, they've done 2 seasons, and the one I'm in and I actually sing in is the 2nd season. I play the salmon spirit, and it's a great story about the ecology of Native Americans and how people think about the earth in a different way, and restoring environments for, you know, nature to happen and survive and thrive.
Cool.
You know,
Well,
Spirit Rangers. Yeah.
yeah, I will look for that. Well, we've kind of
Yeah.
wandered far away from talking about the live album, so let's close out with another question about that. Is this the sort of the best of the old recordings? Because you said that the guy at the Gardens was recording everything that came through, so I'm guessing you might have more tapes where these came from.
Well, we have more tapes.
Yes.
So at romeovoid.com,
Uh-huh.
Frank has compiled a bunch of live shows that you can listen to.
Oh,
Frank's
cool.
in Cabbage is the bass player from Romeo Void. He actually lives about 2 hours south of me near Santa Fe. And so we're back in touch, you know, which is wonderful. I mean, him and I, you know, kept a friendship up, even though we had some hard years around the end of Romeo Void, just, you know, being estranged for different reasons. You know, that's all under the bridge, way under the bridge. And we always had more in common, you know.
Well, rope him into that cover band.
Yeah, it's too far to travel. 2 hours to come and do a practice. Nah, you know. So, but I would love it. He's a great bass player. He makes music on his own. In fact, he has from the Romeo Void page at romeovoid.com, you can link to his music, and he has some really great sense of humor. He's got some really great songs.
Cool. All right. Well, listen.
So he's still making music and composing.
Well,
and he loves dogs.
Yeah.
So him and I have that in common. We love dogs.
Well, I'm glad you've got all this stuff going on. Thanks so much for your time today. And thanks so much for giving us this album.
Oh, and you know that just for record store day is when you can get the vinyl. Yeah. Unless, of course, the store doesn't sell out, and then it'll be available afterwards. But it's really beautiful blue and white vinyl. And each one, you know, the liquid hit the plate, you know, in a different way. So each one is completely unique. And Frank's beautiful Polaroids and photographs are on the album cover. Wow. So, and there's great liner notes from somebody that we knew back in the day and was definitely a part of the scene and close observation, you know, so the liner notes are worth a lot as well in the package. And you can get a CD or digital downloads.
Yeah, no, and it's a great album. Obviously, I've heard it a few times and love it. And I just think, you know, it's something, a real keepsake for the fans, and a great, honestly, a kind of an introduction. If people are, you know, I kind of recognize the name, but I don't know who they are, it's as good a place to start as anywhere else with you guys.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, listen, best of luck with it. And hopefully we'll hear some more music from you before too long.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping, that somebody will want to put it out.
All right. Cheers.
All right. Well, it's nice to talk to you. Bye-bye.
Same here. Bye-bye.